I want to thank both speakers for speaking within the allotted time. That was wonderful. I didn't have to start doing this. We now have 20 minutes for Q&A, and I'll just open the floor. We'll do as many as we can. As we get closer to the end, I'll just gather all the remaining questions, just so that we do our best to get all the voices out. So, anybody have a question to begin with? Well, I'll start with a question then. I guess my question really is for Gertrude, though it does bear some relation to the second talk as well. And the question is how exemplary the example of performative capture is meant to be of something larger at play in the culture. And I guess, you know, it's a very captivating notion, and it also seems to have a much more sort of positive resonance than the blues that animated talk number 2, which was in some ways, I would just say, more sociological in nature. And I guess that's just, you know, one question I have is how you're seeing, because it was a very striking example, but I'm wondering how you see it as translating into other realms of practice, other sectors of existence, because it was in some sense, a single example. So that would be my question, and everybody else can get their questions ready while we hear the answer.
I mean, so let's say my intention was to bring back the questions of technologies to questions of the aesthetics. And aesthetic, I think, is still a domain in which perception plays an immense role. I mean, we wouldn't make things aesthetically if it wouldn't be, I mean, being an address also to our senses. So insofar, my interest here is indeed a disciplinary one. So I wanted to follow this line that I found astonishingly in Max Weber, to say that partly of the, let's say, the technologies are part of cultural techniques that have this both sides inbuilt. I mean, this kind of economic calculation, rationality, economic calculation as a type of rationality, and also, let's say, the aesthetic side of play. So on some level, how much, I mean, have we to attribute the technology, also, let's say, this institutionalizing of technologies to this strata. So how does we can bring it back on some level? I mean, the blues is also an aesthetic form. And so it's a way we think about it's a mood. We know from Heidegger, a mood is also an epistemic state of mind. So, so it's a perspective, it's an affective perspective on something. And I did, not that I'm not a moodish person, but it's on some level, so I wanted to go back to this moment of play. And what does technologies have to do with playing, with inventing, with bricolage, with, you know, with all kind of putting things together. So the way we are using things in practices that are at the first not entirely permeated by the economic calcul. So insofar, I definitely wanted to, I mean, go to the other side, and this has to do what I would call more pragmatist issue here. If we look at this more like practices, in the sense that it's, I mean, also part of human activity and of our actions. And so I think on some level one cannot just say the technology is this kind of, you know, uncanny, animated object that grasps us. So I think this is a model I would not go for. And on some level, let's say my impression are also very different. On some level, I think it might sound cynical, but on some level, I mean, especially when we think about the lectures yesterday, it's still not so that we are really, I mean, are all in possession and possessed by technologies. I mean, the brown internet is a technical catastrophe, I would say. And this is in the core of, I mean, an institution that deals with this problem. So I think there's a lot of, let's say, when one defines it more as a field of practice, I think one comes to different ideas. So we could also speak about the images we have seen. So why do we think that these images are in an interrelation with the invisible work of high technologies? So what is our impulse to bring it back as an image? So this would be for me a question. And how far are these images also, let's say, involved in designing these technologies? I mean, I don't speak about Apple, and so it's too obvious. But it has also to do with this idea of touch and how senses are integrated more and more in this technological practices, so the user side.
Want to say anything?
So it was a question for you,
Maybe.
basically. Camouflage.
Yes, I would like to add something. First, I was very interested in your communication. Gertrude, very convinced by it. For me, as you could hear, capture is a process of grammatization. And grammatization is a process that runs for 30,000 years. And I think we have to think all these questions in such a process. And here, the role, for example, of aesthetics, of artists, etc., is in this process that is always pharmacological. And translating this question of pharmacology in systemic terms, we could say entropic and negentropic. It's possible to translate negative pharmacology into entropy and positive pharmacology into negentropy, that are not opposites. This is very important. This is not a new metaphysics. It is a process in which you have tendencies with which you have to deal and to negotiate. It is a tragic philosophy, not a metaphysical one. In this state of affairs, the question of aesthetics for me is how it is also the question for science, for lawyers, for all kinds of forms of spirit life or intellectual life. The question is to produce bifurcations and to create new circuits of transindividuation. When you have the appearance of a new technology that is changing, like, for example, 1993 with the web, which is completely changing the relations between people. The necessity of creating a new process of transindividuation in the sense of Simondon is an imperative, because this is what makes the solidarity of the society. And it is a role of artists, of scientists, but also of priests, of religions, etc., in certain societies. In our state of development, it is not religion, of course. So here, behind this is a question also of the difference between rationality and rationalization, in the sense of Weber. And for me, the question is also, you use the expression functions of technology, but myself I use the concept of function of reason by Whitehead. I believe we have to mobilize Whitehead here with Simondon and with Deleuze for thinking this moment, in which it is possible to think the role of what you call the play. that I tried to think myself with Winnicott, showing that the first moment of the development of the soul of the baby is to play with the techniques. That is the teddy bear, that is the transitional object. So, saying this, I think that what is the net blues? What do I name net blues? I am an activist, and I work with hacktivists with H a lot, with hackers, etc. And what do they think now for 3, 4, 5 years? They think that always arrive too late. When they think they will be able to develop a new possibility, their work has been used by the industry for making a new business market, a new market in which they are not relevant. And this is the question of disruption. Personally, I believe that this disruption creates a situation that is not sustainable, that is not rational, and that is economically impossible to maintain. Why? Because it was the question today, and addressed through the question of how do we say it? Let's say working on the web, proletarianization on the contributors, and also the distinction between work and labor. Saying that, I just want, and I stop with this, I just want to say that we have a question of macroeconomy. And this question of macroeconomy, that is how shall we create a new system, a rational system for which the redistribution of productivity gains produced by automation and automatization will make the system sustainable. How shall we design, conceive, create a new macroeconomic organization? This is a real question. And for a long time, 30 or 40 years, macroeconomy was destroyed and replaced by microeconomy. And now we have to think the macroeconomy of these questions and the role also of artists, etc., that are producers of negantropy.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Tim?
Thank you very much. It's difficult. My question is for Bernard Stiegler. It's very difficult to avoid metaphors in thinking, and I wanted to ask you about the metaphor of proletarianization, which you use consistently and very fascinatingly. And we heard about the proletarianization of savoir-faire, of the poetic faculties, and of critical knowledge. And I just wanted to ask you to maybe elaborate a bit on your choice of that metaphor and of the history of the theorization of the proletariat and of proletarianization, particularly in relationship to your last comment about the need for a return to the macroeconomic. Is that return? Is there any revolutionary element to the return to the macroeconomic that you envisage? And if so, is there any role of some transformed or refigured or re-theorized proletariat in connection with your idea of the proletarianization in that envisaged process?
Okay, thank you. Of course, this question is extremely important for me and a very difficult one. First, there are many misunderstandings concerning what is proletariat, etc., etc. For a long time, in France particularly, proletarianization was completely confused with pauperization, with impoverishment. And it was, the definition of proletarianization was the increasing of misery, of economic misery. And it is not at all what is said by Marx in the Communist Manifesto in 1848. He says, with Engels, proletarianization is what happens with the exteriorization of knowledge into machines and the loss of knowledge by the worker. This is the process of proletarianization. Pauperization is an effect, a consequence, not at all the definition of proletarianization. And he says also that everybody will be proletarianized. Everybody working into the industrial field. And this is the reason for which I suppressed, because I wanted to respect the time, but I suppressed an analysis I proposed of the discourse by Alan Greenspan in 2008, October 23, when he said, because he had to explain the crisis in Washington and in front of a commission, and he said, I'm not really the responsible of this situation. The question is the automation and the delegation into the system. We don't know how it works. Of course, it was not really satisfying, such an answer, because he had axioms, and those axioms were that every economic agent is rational, and that rationality is computation. Personally, I'm a rationalist, and I believe that rationality is not at all computation. That is understanding that is computation, and rationality is precisely overcoming computation. So behind this is, of course, a political discussion about economy, social, political economy, etc. But what was the system of defense of Greenspan? It was, I am a proletarian. I've lost my knowledge. And he said, for concluding this statement, we should now produce a new economy, a new theory of economy, etc. That is exactly the contradiction of what Chris Anderson said. Now the question is, so it's not a metaphor for me, proletarianization. I tried to describe in relatively precisely and historically how the 20th century was a proletarianization of the consumers, the transformation of the citizen into a consumer. Why? Because exactly like you had in the 19th century, the Office of Engineers saying, we are now deciding the transformation of work, and it's not the role of the workers. So they are not workers, they are laborers, precisely. They have no knowledge. In the 20th century, it was marketing who said, we will now develop and create new behaviors. It's not the people who are producing this by their collective individuation. It is decided by the marketing. Now, at the beginning of the 21st century, with the big data and data scientism, people say, we don't need now to have, because the argument of Chris Anderson is that in Google you can make linguistic capitalism without linguistics, without any capacity. For example, we can translate Chinese, we have nobody speaking Chinese in Google. So it's not now necessary. And there was effects of this discourse, because in Berkeley, I don't know in Stanford, but in Berkeley, they created a new department of data scientism. They suppressed some teachings and departments. So the question after that is the role of proletariat. And here, I'm not a Marxist. I don't follow Marxism. I have tried to show in the book that is entitled State of Shock that the proletariat is not at all what is at stake in the dialectic between the master and the slavery. In this dialectic produced by Hegel, it is not at all a proletarian that is the slavery. It is a bourgeois. It is a craftsman. And he is capable to develop a new knowledge with and through his activity. In the case of the proletarian, it is not at all the case. So I think this idea of the powerful of the negative that is a proletarian is completely wrong. Now, the skepticism produced, the skepsis produced by the situation in which we are now is very interesting. And here I follow not Marx, I follow Deleuze. That is, I think we have to have a quasi-causal apprehension of the problem, and also to see that using this concept of quasi-causality by Deleuze, and also another text of Marx that is not a Capital, but that is a Grundrisse. Here we can produce a possibility that is an economy based on what I call positive externalities, because now we are workers or laborers without wage outside the companies producing many, many things. And it is possible to mobilize this positive externality and for producing a new rationality that is necessary for everybody, even Google, Facebook, and Amazon, because if there is no purchasing power, they will not sell anything. So it's a question of a new economic rationality for me.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I know Wendy has a question. Are there any other questions? Okay, this will be the last question then.
Thank you both for wonderful papers. I have a question for both of you. I'll condense them. So first of all, I was really taken by your move to aesthetics, and it struck me that, of course, the Oscar is voted by humans, and the idea of this is to deceive humans. And to what extent can one start thinking about machine aesthetics for machines? And how would that play into what you're thinking through in terms of that relationship between man, machine, and human? And then I have so much to say for Bernard, and luckily we'll know each other longer, so I don't have to say it all now. But one question that immediately struck me is, of course, the pushback against big data as the end of theory by scientists themselves, and the ways in which big data itself is flawed by the production of false positives. And so a lot of this, which is based on correlation, and of course Deleuze goes to Hume, who talks about the correlation in relationship to causality, right? There's these production of false positives or false collectives which can't be verified. So a terrorist system falsely posits. And to what extent can we think through the falsities of these and the impracticalities of big data as precisely undermining the ways in which computation allegedly takes over understanding?
Yeah, I mean, very short. I mean, this was the first part that came out a bit short here during the lecture. I mean, indeed, so my focus, and so far it is a kind of anthropomorphic and anthropocentric approach I'm following here. Because I start from, let's say, the human condition, so to say, as being a perceiving body. And perception plays here an enormous role. And on some level, I cannot see how can you substitute, let's say, this energetic model of perception, machines seeing other machines. Fine, they can do it. I have no problem with it. But am I interested in? No. I mean, there's a moment they are no longer interested in me. Why should I be interested in them? I mean, it's, you know, it's on some level, I think, a very strange circle that we start to think more and more how we would feel in a world where we are not there. On some level, yes, I'm there old-fashioned. I would stay with, I mean, let's say that it's much more interesting to think about what one can do, so to say, than what will be when I have no action at all anymore. So then I'm dead. I'm socially dead, intellectually dead. So it's always like thinking about their own suicide.
The blues.
The blues.
I work in Europe with Antoinette Rouvroy. Do you know her? Yes, she is a lawyer, and she works with Thomas Berns, who is a philosopher. And they describe what they call algorithmic governmentality with, of course, the concept of governmentality by Foucault, and they try to show that the digital is creating a new regime of truth. I use the expression regime of truth in the sense of Michel Foucault. I follow them, and also I disagree with them, because I follow them because I think it is really the stake, but I disagree with them to qualify, for example, big data as they run today as a regime of truth. It is precisely a regime without truth. And that is short-circuiting the question of truth. Now, I think, because I'm a rationalist, that it is not possible to short-circuit the truth for a long time. But I believe also that they are right by saying that the question, the stake is a regime of truth, even if I believe that algorithmic governmentality is not a regime of truth, because I think the digital has to oblige us to completely redefine what is the question of truth. And here, of course, I mobilize what I said during my communication, that is, we must revisit the distinction between understanding and reason. And understanding, if we follow Kant, is always wrong when functioning alone. Because what is truth, what is true, what is right, is what is capable to produce finalities. This is what Whitehead says. And saying this, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of a scientist, a data scientist of California, very, very well known, but I can't remember his name now, who says that, contrary to Chris Anderson, he says that we have to work with this new stage of understanding. That is, for me, the real question. I tried myself to show in Techniques on Time 3 that understanding is based on artifacts and not at all on transcendental schemas. This was my attempt to reinterpret the critique of Kant. And we are in this situation of correlationist production of data, of metadata, of data on data. We are in a state of production of analysis by the understanding, or Verstand, for which we need to produce a new conception of what is reason. And I finish with this. For this, we have to invent new organology. That is, we cannot only say we will produce new concepts. We must produce new organa, new artificial organa. This is the program of what I try to animate from the area that I call the digital studies, that are not only theoretical, but also production of organa.
Okay, let's thank our speakers.